So I want to, in talking about this topic of fostering resilient families, I just want to make sure it's a relevant topic to our audience. So raise your hand if you are a father. Okay? Raise your hand if you are a mother. All right. Raise your hand if you're a son. I see some people without their hands up. What's happening there? Curious. Raise your hand if you're a daughter. MashaAllah. Everybody knows they come from somewhere. So, alhamdulillah, we're all part of a family, and we, inshallah, this topic will be relevant then. Right? We're all of the same group that we can relate to from one angle or another, inshallah. So, fostering resilient families, what is resiliency? Resiliency is what allows you to stay grounded and stay firm in the face of difficulty and tribulation or things coming to knock you off your center. Right? So being resilient is the ability to stay firm, stay centered, and to sort of not have your faith shaken. And there's a lot of things in this world in general that can shake our faith, that can knock us off, right? Especially it feels like in today's world, it seems like we're constantly bombarded with things that are too much to handle, right? It's just difficult. Whether it's like the things happening in the world that we're impacted by, or even just on a daily basis, the challenges within our families that we may kind of lose our center. So how many of you all that, out of everybody here that is part of a family, how many people, raise your hand if you feel like your family is totally resilient, and no matter what comes, you guys stay solid? MashaAllah. Allah bless all of you with your hands up and keep it going and preserve you. And may we all be able to raise our hands higher, inshallah, in the future. But this is the thing, is that it's difficult. And there's constantly struggles in this life of the dunya. And it's supposed to be that way. It's part of this experience of being human. But what can we do to be more resilient and be able to deal with the things that come and stay solid is by figuring out where is our center. Where is our place that we come back to, that when, have you ever seen one of these like punching bag things that they have a weight in the bottom, you punch them down and then it kind of comes back exactly to its center. Punch it down, it comes back exactly to its center. There's a weight in the middle, in the center of the thing that's bringing it into balance. So anytime that we have our engagement in the world, in this external physical world of the dunya, is this horizontal physical plane. Whenever we deal with the world and identify with and engage in the world from our external self, our sense of ourself as separate in the world, we can be, it's not a very solid, grounded way of being in the world, because we're not of this world. We have a part of ourselves that existed before this world and will exist after this world. And so when we only identify with our sense of ourself as separate, our nafs, our experience of being these separate beings, and engaging with the experience of this physical material reality where all of the difficulty and the trial comes into play, the bala, the difficulty and the trial that is of the dunya, then we're dealing with things that are external, our external self dealing with the external world. And that's going to be shaky. You're going to get knocked off. You're going to fall down and you're going to have a really hard time finding that center, the weight in the middle of your self. And so what we have to do is we have to orient ourselves to center in order to be grounded and be resilient. And that center is a part of ourselves and a part of the world that has to align. So what is the center of all existence? The center, the one common factor in all existence is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? This is the first principle of Tawheed, oneness. This is the center of all reality, is coming back to Allah. Allah is the first and the last. What is the center of our being? We look at the Prophet of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He tells us that there is a piece of flesh in the body. When it is sound, the whole body is sound. When it is corrupt, the whole body is corrupt. And surely that is the qalb, the heart. So the center of our being is our heart. And so if we want to be resilient, we have to align the center of our being with the center of reality, which is Allah. So we have to align our experience and our notion of ourself with the reality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in order to deal with the things when they come that can knock us off center. We always have to come back to what is never knocked off, is eternal, right? Our lives here, our experience of ourselves as these separate beings with all the difficulty and the tribulation we have and the families that we're in and the things that we're doing, this is dunya deep, right? It's from when we started in this life to when we end this life. But our existence, our spiritual reality of ourselves as spiritual beings started before this life. We had a prenatal existence, right? Allah said, Alastu bi rabbikum, and all of the souls before we came into this world said, Bala, shahidna. Certainly we witnessed that reality. Then we came into this life and that was veiled and we got this sense of ourselves as separate. And so when we stay with that separate temporary existence, then it's not very grounded in reality. It's not rooted in our primordial existence and the destination that we're actually traveling to, which is beyond this life, beyond the tribulation. And so we have to come back to this remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but remembrance of our reliance on Allah and our eternal soul that isn't only in existence here. And so how do we do this? Practically, is that we have to root our identity as Muslims in what it means to be Muslim, rather than rooting our identity in this external social identity of being Muslim, right? We come from a family who identifies as Muslim, and so therefore I'm Muslim because my family's Muslim. And that's a cultural identity. Or I'm oriented towards being a Muslim because I do behaviors that a Muslim does, right? We try to do all the things that we're supposed to do and take on these behaviors externally, and we focus on the sort of transactions of what a Muslim is supposed to do behaviorally, and we hope that that will orient us in the right way. And these things are fundamental. They're important. We need these external things to hold us in place, but we need to know what are we nurturing and where are we grounded and what are we rooted in terms of our soul, the inner reality of ourselves, being in a state of Islam. Not necessarily just joining the Muslim club and having your membership card that says I'm Muslim and I look Muslim and I dress Muslim and I pray externally and hope that my actions will get me into Akhirah. But actually, being a Muslim is somebody who is in a state of submission where their heart, the center of their self, their heart is submitted to Allah. And if your heart is submitted to Allah, then you are more resilient because you have this understanding that your core experience, your core reality, and your core identity is not so up and down. It's our experience of ourselves as separate. Our state of our nafs goes up and down. But our heart has the ability to be connected and in surrender and in submission. And so when we orient ourselves as families within our identity of being Muslim, we need to understand that Islam is more than just an organized religion. Islam is a reality and is a path of being human, and it is a state of being. We want to cultivate being Muslim, not just acting Muslim or doing the Muslim thing. Right? We want to be in a state of Islam. When we are more in a state of Islam, that's going to root us and be grounded so that we're locating ourselves in this physical, horizontal, dunya, temporary, material reality, while still recognizing that we have a vertical connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that goes beyond our social identities in this temporary life, right? Whether we're Pakistani or Syrian or Philistini or these identities that we have, that we carry, that are temporary part of our existence here. When we identify with that and the difficulty in the world, we're going to get knocked off every which way. But if we root ourselves in a notion that of who are we really, we're servants of Allah, and we have the ability to be in a state of Islam in the heart. And so that means there's a lot of work that we have to do on the inside of ourselves in tandem with the external trappings of a Muslim. You know, we do the things that we're supposed to do. We come to the masjid, we treat our parents well, we pray, we make dua, we read Quran. These are all things that help us be resilient to deal with the dunya as a protective layer, protection to protect what? To protect the real jewel and gem that's inside, which is our heart. But our heart can be corrupt. Our heart can be corrupt even if you're doing all these things on the outside. Allah says Allah does not change a people until they change what is within themselves. So what is within ourselves? The Prophet ﷺ tells us the core of the human being is the heart. So there is a place where we have to root our Muslim identity in our heart, in our state of being, and orient to Islam as the path of the reality of being human in this world. And that should guide how we operate as families so that we can deal with, we don't get caught in the tribulation of relationships and getting upset with one another and dealing with the hardships of finances or the hardships of, we want to go to this college, we can't get in, I want to be a doctor, all these things that are dunya oriented that we get caught up in and we sort of breaks us down is because we've lost the plot. We forget what we're really here for and who's really directing our lives. You know, when we become self-directed in our lives as individuals within families, it's gonna throw us off because we forgot what the reality is. That Allah is in control and that we are servants of Allah and that our goal is to submit our will to Allah. And so one of the things, I wanna just talk about three things that I see as patterns in families that I think we need to pay attention to. The first thing is that Parents, we often, I'm a parent, so I include myself in this, we often forget what our role is as parents, and we think that these are our children, that my child that I'm responsible for, and I have to tell them what to do, teach them, and fully, guide them from day one until they're dead, their whole life. I'm responsible for them. But what the Sheikh said in the talk about the hadith, that you can get sin if you don't take care of your family. The taking care of your family is like a khalifa, a stewardship. There's a stewardship aspect to that. That's like Allah has given you an amana, a sacred trust of responsibility to take care of not your children, His children. Each one of us comes from Allah, we return to Allah. So whose are we? Whose are our children? They're Allah's, not ours. Allah is the one guiding everybody, every single one of us. And so our role as parents needs to come into reality of like, how much power and responsibility do we really have, and where does that start and stop, right? The amana means we're supposed to nurture, take care of, but we need to understand that there are certain dispensations of how to be a parent that we learn from the Islamic tradition. So Ali ibn Abi Talib said that we should 777. We should play with them for 7, teach them for 7, and befriend them for 7 years, the children. And what happens is we tend to think of parenthood as, well, it's our responsibility to teach our children, and we see them as children their whole life, so we're teaching them all the time. And we're teaching them to do things, be this way, think this, right? But if we look at this Islamic pedagogy in relation to the reality of our souls here with Allah, there's really only a 7-year window when the teaching happens that is responsible specifically from the parent. Because we're supposed to exist in communities. Doesn't mean we're on our own, but there's communities. So the parent plays with the child for 7 years because it establishes this love and this connection and this trust. And then from 7 to 14, there's teaching, because the nafs development at that stage is able to receive guidance without there being as much of a resistance, and it works. It makes sense for the development of the soul in this life. But that window often doesn't, usually we're teaching and guiding and telling them what to do, what to think beyond age 14. At age 14 on, it's supposed to be befriend them, meaning, what does it mean to be a friend? You're standing side by side like your Muslim brother or sister, and like you're looking in the distance at what their challenges are, and you're saying, hey, let's try to figure this out together, because I'm in it with you, and we're all under Allah. So the difficulty here is we get attached. We get attached to like you said, it's innate, it's natural to care for your child. Especially for mothers who birth their children, how can you just let them go, right? But then when we do this and we try to get control over these other human beings, we get really frustrated. And they get really frustrated. And it's very hard to have a resilient family because we're not abiding by and playing by Allah's rules. We're trying to play by our own rules, of our own attachments. And so if we align with the reality of what Allah has positioned us to be steward, then we can deal with the difficulty and come back to center. If we come back to the center being, oh yeah, Allah is the one in control, and all of this is a temporary situation for us to come into recognition and realization of Him and His omnipotence and our submission to Him. And we forget because we get caught up in our external notion of life and our self-direction. So for parents, first and foremost for myself, as a reminder, we should be focused on teaching our children how to think, not necessarily teaching our children what to think. Right? We need to teach them what to think. We need to teach them things to do, and we need to teach them what Allah has taught us. But the teaching from a parent to a child really needs to be from 7 to 14. There are other people in the community who can participate in teaching beyond that. But all of us should be teaching how to think rather than what to think. If you teach somebody what to think, then as soon as you go away, how do you know that they're going to actually know what the formula is and the framework is and the philosophy is that leads towards that teaching what to think? They may just be behaving behaviorally because of fear of disappointment or just following. What we want to do is root people in their heart and connect their heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that they can have the fundamental alignment with figuring out how to navigate the world based on these first principles of it always comes back to Allah. Everything is for the sake of Allah. Everything comes from Allah. We return to Allah, and Allah is the one in control of everything. Everything that we get, no matter whether we like it or understand it, is a manifestation of Allah's will. And so if we root people in that and root our families in the sense of how are we Muslim? How are we people who are submitted? You know, being a Muslim is you're submitted to what is. Whatever happens, you go with it. You submit it because you see La ilaha illallah. There is no source of anything happening other than Allah. And so that fundamentally brings you back to center. It doesn't mean a good family doesn't mean it's a family that doesn't have problems or doesn't have challenges. It means that they see the challenges as opportunities to get closer to Allah, not as problems to get rid of, but that they are things that can potentially be reminders that we need to submit, we need to surrender, and we need to remember what the real purpose of our existence and our being is, and that we're just here temporarily, and that Allah is the one in control of all of us, and we have to remind ourselves of this position. And so this is something that we have to do as communities, not just within individual families, because it takes a village to raise a child. We're supposed to be in community. So the second thing that I would say is that we need to orient ourselves and our children to Islam as more than just a religion, more than just a series of things that you're supposed to do and memorize, but actually orient to Islam as the reality of what it is, as a path for being human well. It's a cheat sheet for life. It's a map for life. It shouldn't be separate. We shouldn't treat it as religion is over here, and we are Muslims and we're different than everybody else, and this is our religion, and it's in the mosque and it's in Ramadan. And then there's life over here, but that actually Islam is a path for life. And so we need to orient ourselves to understanding that being Muslim is just being human. It's not a separate identity that makes you different from other human beings. You know, like myself, I'm a convert to Islam. So I don't have a cultural identity that is wrapped up in my Muslim identity. My sense of being Muslim is being human. I feel like the more human that I can be, the more Muslim that I will be, and vice versa. And so we need to orient our understanding of Islam in a way that is practical, that it's not just this thing that you do and do's and don'ts as a transactionally, so if I do this, then I'm going to be okay with Allah and I'm being akhirah. But no, we need to see it as a system for transformation. So not just transactional, but it's transformational. By engaging in this path of Islam, we can be more resilient. We can be more rooted in our heart and our true identity as a ruh, as a spiritual being, in this temporary human experience, and know that Islam is integral to our life. It's not separate. It's not, okay, I go to work and I manage my finances and I deal with relationships over here, and so I got to find, just like a secular therapist and go and do like Buddhist meditation and mindfulness to deal with my stress, but then Islam is where I pray and I read Quran and I go to the masjid. No, these need to come together and realize that Islam is the way to live life. It's not just a organized religion. It's a reality of humanity. And I think that will make it much more accessible and relatable to young people, because that means they can adapt Islam to their life in this time, this contemporary life that we live in, which is how Islam is supposed to be and always has been. Islam is a religion for every time. It's not supposed to look like it looked like back home or back 50 years ago or 100 years ago. We take those principles, the first principles of what the Sahaba did, and we implement it in this reality of what it looks like today. That's what's going to make it more relatable to our young generation, is that they have to revive Islam and adapt Islam to this time. So it needs to look, Islam should look how they look. It shouldn't look how it looked before with our parents' parents, or in another land. It needs to be relatable and real for today here in Toronto. What does it look like to be a Muslim in Canada in 2025 soon, right? This is the idea. This is what it means. This is what tradition is. Islamic tradition is something that is living. It's a living tradition. It has to be revived and updated. And so the only way we can do that is if we see it as dynamic. We see it as life, not as some archaic thing in the past that is dusty and looks the same. Which is why I love seeing this cafe here and like all of the offices upstairs and like the life that's being brought into here. This is how you bring people into have resilient communities, resilient families, by giving everybody a place, by having them be able to be themselves within Islam. Because otherwise you're going to get people who are, I'm this identity and that identity and that identity, oh, and then I'm Muslim, and that's another one of my 17 identities. No, your Muslim identity is who you are. It's the core. It shouldn't be a hat or a hijab that you take on and off. It should be in the heart, regardless of what you wear. So that's, I think, how we need to orient in our communities. And then lastly, finally, I would say one of the fundamental things that I see that will help people be resilient and integrate their sense of themselves as human and the Islamic tradition in a living tradition and reality of being a balanced human being is by being in touch with nature. Our deen is completely aligned with natural rhythms. The moon cycle, the sun, the day and the night, the whole world is a place of prayer. Our Prophet ﷺ used to spend lots of time in nature, in a cave, sitting, connecting with nature. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran is constantly telling us to look at the signs on the horizon in nature as signs for ourselves. So how do we integrate? The only way we can integrate our bodies with our souls, our material separate sense of ourself as separate with our eternal spiritual reality, is by finding ourselves, we find our nature in nature. We have to live embodied in this embodied physical world in order for our souls to be aligned with our body. This is why our prayer is physical. We stand, we bend, we bow, we put our head on the ground. If you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, they were outdoors most of the time. They were riding horses. When the Prophet ﷺ tells us to ride horses and do archery and swim and wrestle, this isn't lahu. This isn't just fun, games. This is fundamentally how we integrate our ourselves and our being to be able to be resilient in this world. I'll give you an example. The Prophet, ﷺ, when the archers had lost the Battle of Uhud and they came back, he told them to practice archery. It wasn't because they weren't good at archery. It was because archery integrates your body. It's like a treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. You know, people are experiencing people being killed on the battlefield, trauma, difficulty. And how did they become resilient? By practicing archery, you're stretching your body, your physical body, you're focused on a target, you're connected to your breath, and you're doing everything you can do to control what's in your internal locus of control, your body and your consciousness and awareness, your mind, your soul, and then you're letting it go and letting it in the hands of Allah, wherever the arrow lands. But what it's doing is when you even stretch your body, it opens up meridians in your shoulders where we carry a lot of our stress, and it integrates it into our body, integrates our soul with our body. So we have to be embodied in this world. We have to spend time outdoors. We have to spend time building things. We have to spend time growing food. This isn't an old way of doing things. This is the fitri way of doing things. It's how we become solid and grounded and centered in this world with our spiritual and physical reality. And so, you know, it's beautiful that you have this mosque, and it's a great intention that a lot of communities are always focused on building mosques, right? But it would be better if they built the mosque together. Like actually the community gets together and hammers and nails and builds, and instead of just raising money to have somebody else build a mosque, it's about doing some work, working together in community, using your bodies, using your intention, aligning your will for the purpose of sohbah and doing something for the sake of Allah in the world. This is how we build resiliency, not only in families, but community. And so we have to just spend more time outdoors, spend more time in our bodies, be more physically active with one another, spending time with one another, getting off of screens, getting out of indoors, stop, we ride cars sitting down, sedentary, to go to jobs, sitting in front of computers, and we just talk about ideas. When we talk about Islam, it's like all talking, but Islam needs to be embodied. We need to be living it and breathing it and feeling it so that it gets in our hearts and so that we're centering ourselves from the inside so that we can then deal with what's on the outside rather than having everything just be our external selves engaging with an external world and an external transactional notion of Islam. This is, I will leave it here. Jazakallah khair. Thank you for listening. And I would love to, I like answering questions and being in conversation more than talking at you, but so I don't know how much time we have, but I'd be happy to engage in some discussion. Assalamu alaikum.
I have 3 teenagers, and I'm trying to teach them. I call them like 3 stages. You know, they're dependent, and then dependent, and then I'm trying to teach them to become interdependent. That transition. I'm just looking for some ways or some ideas on how, or examples that I could use for them to be ready for the world. Barakallahu feek.
This is a great question. I have teenagers too. I have a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old and a 9-year-old. And with my teenage girls, I really try to do things with them. Like the whole idea of befriending, this is the stage of befriending, right? And so what do you do with your friend? You don't teach your friend. Like you will probably won't keep friends very long if you're like, hey, you should do that and you should do that and this is what you should do and I think you should do it better this way. Instead you're like, hey, what do you think about this? Like I think about it this way. What do you think about that? And then also you'd probably go with them to do something, right? If your friend is struggling with something, if you're a good friend, you might pick up and be like, hey, let's go out and research this thing I'll drive you around and we'll figure it out together. You know, this is the approach of like, at this stage, you've got to approach it with curiosity and like workshopping it and being like, standing with them, being like, how do you think we could solve this problem? And what are your ideas of like what's needed, what's missing? And then you kind of offer like, I didn't think about it that way. You're right. That's something interesting. I've done it this way. This is how I've tried it. Would you like to, benefit from my perspective or my resources, or what do you think? It's this exchange where you're in it together and you're helping them figure out how to be. The interdependency comes from, showing them how to think and then them figuring it out on their own and figuring out, being resourceful, That's something that has to be kind of demonstrated. And you can apply it. What you can do is, this is why traditionally that age group of teenagers, they would always be, so like the tradition of fatua, which is, there would be like fatua guilds where there would be centered around apprenticeships. And a young person would be learning a craft or a skill. This is why Islamic art has a very sacred and purposeful position. It's not just beauty, but like the people that made this calligraphy, there's a craft in learning the calligraphy, there's a craft in learning the materials, and by going through this apprenticeship of learning how to use the materials that may just seem like an external thing, you're learning ihsan, excellence, you're learning sticking to something, you're learning how things have systems and frameworks, you're learning how to be patient through wanting something to be done, but you have to take the steps to do it. You're learning to be unattached from the outcome because you have to be patient and you have to look to the long term. So all these things you can't learn by sitting down and telling somebody about it. You have to learn in tarbiyah, in doing and experiential learning. This is absolutely a necessity for teenagers.
Okay, so we just had a question from the brothers' side, so I'd like to give the floor to the sisters. If they have any questions, just raise your hand and Sister Dahlia will hand you the mic.
Alaikum Ustad. Thank you for that. I appreciate most of what you've said, and we're trying to operationalize it at home. One of the struggles that I find is in moving into that friend zone is navigating the challenge of dopamine as it even relates to myself as an adult. I find it so challenging to balance and to break away from what has been designed to keep us riveted. And so, not just as I'm as much asking the question for myself, I suppose, as I am as a mother, is how do you, when you can see it, you've done the research, you've read up, you've heard people who've designed these applications saying we designed them to make them addictive, and so then how do you at that stage stop policing? I would love to stop policing.
Yeah, great question. And just to be explicit and connect the dots, when you say dopamine, you're holding your phone, but you mean like the screens, the social media, the phones, everybody. Yes. So I suffer from this in my family as well, even though I know the research and I know the because it's like you said, it's like a Trojan horse that has come into our homes that it's very hard to get out from under it. But what I do, or what we try to do, and what I would recommend is that first of all, we learn through example, and we learn this from our Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam. And so, if you want your kids to manage the balance of the screen, you have to do it too. Otherwise, you'd be a hypocrite, right? And so, if you I don't recommend completely getting rid of screens because I don't think that's realistic and it will probably backfire. So you have to allow space for it, but you have to also allow space for real life interactions. So what I say is like allow in your own life and in the home with everybody, there's time to use the screens, and ideally, the same amount of time that they're on screens, they should spend in some sort of real life engagement. So ideally, outside. But I happen to live in the UAE, where most of the year you can't go outside because it's too hot. If it wasn't, I would, and maybe here a lot of the time it's too cold. But it doesn't. So if you can go outside, like have ways to just do activities outside, even if it's like, if you look at traditional societies, even just like getting our provisions required us to be outside and working, so it was like having chores is part of like getting out and into the world, and it's part of tarbiyah, it's part of learning, it's not just we need this thing done and we want them to contribute. It's actually a fundamental part of them being healthy people, is to be physically active. And so you've got to balance it. Like basically, if for whatever amount of time they're on a screen, they should spend either outside or engaging in some sort of emergent interaction, meaning there's like, whether it's like playing a game with people or building something or doing a puzzle or doing something with your hands, doing something, So I think you've got to regulate it, and you've got to put things in place that are still enjoyable, and adapt it to everyone's interest. Like if you just say like, everybody put your phone in the basket and we have to like do this thing that nobody wants to do, it's not going to last very long, But if you have a collective conversation of like, hey, what is it that you like so much on this phone? How can we find a real life activity that relates to that? Or what are your passions that you really like that maybe are getting sidelined because you're getting caught in this thing? And figure out a way to creatively get everybody to bring themselves to it, like their talents or their interests or their mizaj, their temperament. But it takes, you've got to be intentional about it and follow through. But it will have enormous impact on every part of your family life. Inshallah.
Thank you for that question, sister. I'd like to, the brother in the back, I'll just get you the mic.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam.
I have 8 children, and
MashaAllah.
eldest is 20 and the youngest is 2-year-old. And it's really tough for us to be friends for our teenagers and to be parents for the
all
younger
stages
ones.
at once, yeah.
And frankly, the youngest ones like take all your energies throughout the day, and we have only 1 day and 7 days a week. And so what would you suggest for us, or even for small families who have elder, like age difference between the elder kids and the younger ones? It's really difficult to give time to age groups.
Yeah.
So what would you suggest?
I would
Thank you.
suggest grandparents. You need help, right? You need more than just two parents. So this is what grandparents are great for. We just moved in my in-laws into our home, and it's great because you get the intergenerational aspect. You get other people there. It's a community, right? And it shouldn't. So I know in the situation we live in our individualist societies with nuclear families, that may be difficult or impossible. But in that case, then first of all, I would still default to you need more than just you. Like it does take a village, especially when you have your own village with your kids, right? Then second, and so that it can be uncles, it can be friends, it could be neighbors, it could be, like they're not just your children. They're Allah's children, therefore they're all of our children. It's all of our responsibility. So you need to get other people to be involved and not have the weight just on you. But then secondly, if that's not a possibility, if it is a possibility, seek that out. If it's not, you've got to be really disciplined and you got to have a schedule, I would say. And like you said, there's 7 days in the week and you have 8 children, so you may have to figure out how to add a day to the week. But I would say you have to have some sort of rotation where you're spending quality time with each one of them in a rotation. This is why the lives that we live that are not in community, where they can't just play in the street with auntie and uncle and know that it's going to be okay, it's not natural, right? So because of that, we have to do things that are unnatural to bring things into balance. And so that means you're going to have to spend more time than probably you have to spend. And that's the only way to bring it into balance. And then because if you give them specific time and say, okay, this is your time, then it's going to be helpful for you because you have to like code switch of like, you're doing the befriending with these kids and then like, oh yeah, play, like it's totally different mode of being. So you have to be merciful with yourself. You're not going to be able to do it perfectly, right? But if the more you give yourself some space and you dedicate. So the other thing is like, what I do is try to cross over things as much as possible. Things that I want to do for myself, like I'm really dedicated to exercising. It's really important for me. If I give it up, I lose my sense of center and resiliency. So I bring my kids with me to the gym, or I work out at home with them, so that with the teenagers is great because they're more capable, they need to be doing that anyway. Do the workout with them, and if you're not working out, you should be, so use your kids as an excuse to work out, and then you're spending quality time. My 9-year-old, who's autistic, he can't like lift the weights and do stuff with me, but the one time I have a stationary bike that I use, and there's like an iPad on it, and so I tell him like and this is another way of like, he can have the screen if he's moving his body. And then he's doing it with me, and I'm in the room with him. We're spending time. I'm connecting with him while he's there. He's watching, but it's also a way to monitor what he's watching, and I'm interacting with it. So, I could just be like, well, I need me time, so I'm gonna go work out, but there's only so many hours in the day, so you kind of have to be systematic about it, plan, and be scheduling in, making sure you're spending the right kind of time and amount of time and with each kid. And it doesn't need to be equal, but it should be equitable.
Take one question from the sisters and then one last question here from the brothers, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. I have 2 kids, 11 and 12 years. So they are so playful, so energetic, and but sometimes when it comes to Quran or Hadith course, so they become not interested at all. Sometimes lazy, headache, and just sometimes I feel like they are interested about listening the story or memorizing, but other times just they are waiting to finish just to do something more interesting than that. So sometimes I feel like my way there is something wrong on the way I'm giving the lesson for them, and sometimes I think what's the best way to give this lesson, and in other times when you see them speaking with other people, you feel like they understand the lesson, they are memorizing, they are giving lessons to others, so they really
Getting
try
in
to,
somehow.
yeah.
How old are
So,
they?
so 11 and 12.
11 and 12. So, I mean, it's again, it's different based on the age. But so on one hand, 11 and 12, it's okay to make them do something that they don't want to do at that age. It's more okay than it would be like if they were below 7 or above 14, right? But in that window, like you can go a little bit beyond what they would like, because that's your time to get it in. That's your time to teach, right? So I would say, allow for that a little bit, but then also in order to go beyond their capacity, you've got to make it interesting to them. So you have to be creative. There's only so much they can do because you want them to do it, and that's fine. You push them up until that limit, and as soon as you see that they're full, back off. And then, but that doesn't mean you have to back off of like you said, they're engaged if it's like storytelling. So this is what's so beautiful about the seerah. There's all kinds of resources out there now for different age groups that make it engaging and interactive and maybe even updated to their world, using language and metaphors that make sense to what they're interested in their life, and make it connected. Don't make it like, okay, you have the things that you're interested in regular life, and then, okay, here comes, you have to do your Islamic learning, and here comes the hadith. I have to do this religious stuff. It's, again, don't keep it separate. Keep it integral and make it relatable. Like, so, find resources that somebody else has already made that is relatable, and if you can't find it, create your own based on your children and what they're excited about. It has to be exciting for them to want more. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, which is why I said it's okay to push them in this developmental stage, even if they don't like it. Yeah. So, make some of it rote and boring, and make some of it attractive and engaging, and make it easy for them. Otherwise, you're just going to push them away. It's more important that they love Islam and that they see it as something beautiful than they see it as something forced upon them. If it feels forced upon them, it's not going to make them better Muslims or more Muslim. It's most likely going to make them reject it. It should be inviting. It should be beautiful. It should be loving. Like, I never told my kids to pray. I always just, they saw me praying, and then whenever they would come by me, I would like tackle them and wrestle them on the ground and give them lots of love and hugs and kisses. And then so they associated prayer with something positive and loving and accepting. And so now they pray on their own. I never told them to. It's just they have a positive connection with it. It's not pray because you have to pray, and if you don't pray, you're bad. It's, you have to make it beautiful, because it is beautiful.
Okay, so our final question for the night, inshallah, is from this brother.
So, brother, how would you help with authenticity, especially for the teenagers? Because as kids are younger, you're playing with them, that's authentic. When they're growing older, you're training them, that's authentic. But as they're turning into teenagers, like it feels forced, or it would be if you're trying to make friends with them. It's not natural. And us as parents, changing their role from teaching them to being their friends, how would you encourage, like how would you advise bringing authenticity into it so it really is friendship as opposed to something that's forced?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the tough part of this is like sometimes parents just try to turn over a new leaf, like as they're teenagers, and then it's harder because that's why the whole system kind of works successively. So like if you played with them for 7 years, right? If you got down on their knees and hands and did what they want to do, and like wrestled them and whatever was playful for them, then their heart is going to be more open to you in those other successive stages. Meaning they're going to want to be your friend more because you have this attachment and this bond. So, but there's a lot of parents who didn't do that because they didn't get the manual that came with the babies in the hospital, which maybe we should start making in the Muslim communities. But so it's not all lost. It doesn't mean that you can't do it if you didn't, but it just means you're gonna have to make a little bit more room for you to build that bond, because it's the bond of trust that allows for them to allow you to be their friends. And so it doesn't mean like if they're 14, you can't really like get on their hands and knees and go goo goo gaga and play with them and wrestle them, but you need to maybe let them show you how they can be the trust can be built. You know, it feels unnatural a lot for parents a lot of times. Like, why should I, as a parent, be trying to get them to, trust me? But then, like, okay, so don't do that, and then see how it goes. You know, like it. Then you're just upset that they don't open up, right? So if you want them to open up, you've got to find a way in by, I'm assuming they're beyond 14, right? Yeah. So you've got to find out what they're interested in, but you have to do it from a genuine place. Like, so you can't like pretend to know about, I don't know, whatever it is they're into, but you can be genuinely ignorant about those things and ask them to teach you. That's a really good thing. Like every 14-year-old wants to teach their parents, like something. And so sit down and let them teach you about, I don't know, I think Minecraft is too old for 14-year-old, right? Whatever they're into. With my daughter, it's makeup, right? So I don't really care much about makeup, but she's really interested in it. And so I let her talk to me about it, and I ask her questions about it, and I let her recommend facial cleanser for me, and I use it, and she makes her really happy and feel really bonded to me because I'm washing my face. So I do it, and it's a great way. I love being connected with her. It's whatever it is, whatever's going to facilitate that, I'm into it. So that's, I think, the right attitude to adopt. And let them dictate. It's going to be different for each kid. Like my 16-year-old my 13-year-old, something totally different. So you find out what that is, and that should be your way of connecting. All right, is that it? Thank you, everybody. I think we've lost a lot of people, but thank you for hanging in there, and thank you for your questions. And may Allah make all of your families resilient, and may we, inshallah, as a community, be guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to show us how we're supposed to be holding His deen and this path in this time and this age for our families. Ya Allah, make us grounded and rooted in the deen of Islam and to carry it in the right way, in the true way, in the way of the Prophet ﷺ and all of the Sahaba, and the way that they were holding it in this most beautiful and most natural way that was connected to the earth and connected to each other, and that was dealing with difficulty and dealing with hardship and dealing with odds that were completely against them, but that they remained focused on what is true and what is important in the unseen reality that is present in this physical reality. And may we always be grounded in that and attached to that. And may we all be protected. And may we keep our children within this masjid and within the fold of Islam and within our families, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Malik Yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين